As we pivot to news, I want to read from David Ignatius's piece in the Washington Post, which is about my father. He writes this: Brzezinski would have been appalled, but not surprised by the results of Trump's Group of Seven meeting on Saturday, after which German Chancellor Angela Merkel said that the era when Europe could rely on American leadership was over to a certain extent. Brzezinski's worries about Trump grew out of his belief in the interdependent world that the United States had made. Having seen Western values and freedoms crushed in Poland, he was protective of them. Trump's populism was abhorrent to this son of Polish aristocracy, but it wasn't just that. Brzezinski didn't think Trump understood what a precious creation he was jeopardizing by so recklessly challenging the institutions of the West.
And so, Mika, there was a lot of fallout this weekend about that foreign trip. In a tweet, President Trump called his trip a great success, talked about hard work and big results. And that was echoed also by Republican congressmen, including Bob Corker, which was a bit of a surprise, who said it was executed in near perfection. It wasn't.
It was
he added that President Trump should be commended for the trip's success. James Mattis also defended the president's tough talk. But Andrea Mitchell, I don't really care what politicians in Washington, D.C. are saying about a trip they know was a complete disaster.
Embarrassment.
You look at the president's actions, you look at the gestures,
the ugly
you
American.
looked at the bullying of him pushing the newest member out of the way to get in the front of picture. You look at that awkward handshake with Macron, but more importantly, you have Angela Merkel and her opponent saying, America treated us horribly. We can no longer depend on the United States of America. And Europe's going to have to worry about itself. This is I said yesterday, and I'd be hard pressed for anybody if somebody can find a more disastrous foreign trip since Kennedy's 1961 summit with Khrushchev. I'd like to know what it was, because this was a disaster.
I mean, you know, the European relationship, 70-plus years of the NATO alliance, and the boorish behavior is just so extraordinary, capped by his refusal. I mean, bad enough to not explicitly say that he was committed to Article 5, to the Mutual Defense Treaty, at a commemoration for 9/11, which was the only time in history that NATO did declare Article 5 to come to the defense of the United States of America. And to not commit to the Paris Climate Accord is just so shocking. That's the thing. And he has until June 1st, I guess. He's going to make some decision this week. But the fact that they are wrestling with this, and we saw General Mattis saying over the weekend, well, he's taking it in, he's learned a lot. Everyone trying to give him running room, but he's not going to be bullied into it by his staff, that's for sure. And for all of their bragging about Riyadh and what they did, and it was an interesting experiment in Riyadh, but the fact that they ignored the Sunni sponsored terror and then go to Europe, which has just experienced terror, and see the reluctance to sign on, and the fact that he refused to lecture the Saudis and the other Arab leaders, but did lecture his NATO allies in Europe, is just stunning.
It's like we said last week, Willie, he's far more comfortable hanging around autocrats, whether they're in Turkey or whether they're in Russia, wherever they are, than he is with democratically elected leaders in the West.
He certainly was much more deferential in that speech in Saudi Arabia than the one he was at NATO. We saw that video, Richard, of President Macron, the handshake where he sort of left President Trump hanging there. And a lot of people read into that. Macron came out yesterday and said, yeah, I was actually sending a message by not walking up to the President of the United States first. But in terms of Angela Merkel's comments, obviously it was at a domestic political event. What would it take for her, the leader of Germany, our great ally, to go out and say that in public? What do you think happened behind the scenes to drive her or put her in that position?
What I think came together, Willie, because you're right, this can't be exaggerated. You could hear the tectonic plates of history move the other day. This was big. I think it was a combination of just policy difference after policy difference, from Russia to trade to climate, you name it, just fundamental differences on long-standing areas where the United States and Europe had been mostly in parallel. what Andrea was getting at, the refusal to talk about Article 5, coming against the backdrop where he called NATO obsolete. Basically, what Mr. Trump has succeeded at doing is making conditional what for so long, for generations, was unconditional. And then thirdly, it's the personal. The conversations, it's hard to say, they're not going well, to say the least. This is not what these people expect of an American president.
Look at the handshake. He looked like a thug. He looked like a goon. You look at the handshake. You look at this. Just what a thug! What an embarrassment! Look, he's mauling him like an idiot. Like an absolute. Just what an embarrassment to the United States.
Optics matter, and so do the actual conversations. And I think,
well, if it were followed by positive conversations, you could just say that he was awkward.
But for Merkel to say what she said shows they see no talent. They see absolutely nothing behind the eyes that they can work with.
Again, they were so deferential. He was so deferential in Saudi Arabia. So deferential. And he was just the opposite. He was a bull in the china shop of an alliance that was first built with the blood of young Americans and people across the West by freeing the continent. And then, from 1947 forward, we have spent blood, sweat, tears, billions of dollars building an alliance that Donald Trump is willing to throw away because he wants to make points with Vladimir Putin.
Well, or wants to make points with his domestic political base, which is what a lot of the European posturing seemed to me, at least as you watched it unfold last week, to be aimed at an audience at home, not to be aimed to the foreign policy establishment, nor to our European allies, but instead kind of playing to the crowd back at home among people who voted for him. But Richard, I wanted to ask you, you said this thing about tectonic plates shifting. I noticed Vali Nasser, the dean of SAIS, tweeted over the weekend. I want to know if we ask you whether you think this rings true to you. He tweeted, in less than 3 months in office, Trump has managed to undo 7 decades of transatlantic relations. Does that seem does that seem exaggerated to you or on the nose?
It seems basically right. Normally we think of the word legacy as something we write at the end of a presidency. Well, now we can write something of a legacy at the beginning of a presidency. That what he has done is made uncertain what was sure, what was fundamental. And in European eyes, he has essentially pushed them in a direction that for 70 years we tried to prevent, which was Germany and Europe going their own way. The whole lesson of the first half of the 20th century was the United States needed to be inextricably linked to the fate of Europe. And that if Europe was allowed to go its own way, Russia would find benefit for itself. It would pick and choose among them. Germany could be cast adrift, and so forth. And that is what we are setting in motion. It's so interesting. We began the show today with John Kennedy. He was a president who wrote history, who read history, who was steeped in history. And the last line of David Ignatius's column, talking about your father, that I think we have a president, because he's not familiar with history, literally doesn't understand how he's playing with history and setting in motion historical forces that could have enormous consequences.
And that's something that we've said here on the show. It's also something that I warned Trump officials and Trump himself in the transition. And I said it repeatedly. I said, you people believe that history begins on January 20th, 2017. You have got to get a better understanding of what you're stepping into. Because this didn't start with John Kennedy. This started with Harry Truman. It started with a Marshall Plan. It started with containment. It went through Ike and John Kennedy, through Nixon, through Reagan, through Obama. It's gone a long time. And again, in 3 months, all the work of those presidents to continue the line of a strong, free, safe, vibrant Europe that helps the United States.
That's the point. It's not a favor we do to Europe.
We're not doing a favor for anybody. The Marshall Plan wasn't to help the Europeans. The Marshall Plan was to help in the fight for freedom so the Soviets didn't take over Europe just like the Nazis had taken over Europe. And for some reason, Donald Trump doesn't understand.
And we haven't even gotten to Jared and Ivanka and champagne popsicles. Still ahead on Morning Joe.
What?
Yeah.
That tastes good, I bet.
Yeah, that's really...
Best thing I've heard this
morning. All right, President Jimmy Carter is going to join us to talk about Dr. Brzezinski's legacy in U.S. foreign policy.
Also, we'll talk to 2 of the journalists who've been leading the way with scoop after scoop on the White House, Robert Costa and Glenn
How do you
Thrush.
like those 2 guys on your trail?
You're watching Morning Joe. We'll be right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.